The prairie wore the colors of dusk like a tired old quilt, threads of orange and violet stitched across the sky. Cicadas droned a funeral hymn to the fading day. Heat lingered low in the dust, wrapping the world in a breathless silence. Against that wide and empty backdrop, a young woman stumbled forward. Her body bent, as if life itself were a weight she could no longer carry. She clutched to her chest 2 bundles wrapped in torn scraps of cloth, tiny mouths breathing shallowly against her bruised collarbone. Her name was Eliza, though in that hour it felt as though no one in the world cared enough to call it aloud. Her lips were cracked, her skin mottled with bruises, both old and new, and a thin line of blood dried on her temple. The earth beneath her bare feet was hot and merciless, each step carving another notch into her dwindling strength. Her eyes, wide and glassy, carried no illusions of rescue. She had been discarded like spoiled fruit by those who should have sheltered her, left to wander the unforgiving expanse. A widow at 23, Eliza had been betrayed by her late husband's kin. She was punished simply for giving birth to twin girls instead of the sons they had demanded, a cruel twist of fate in a world that valued boys above all else. The blows they gave her still throbbed under her ribs, sharp reminders of their brutality. The kicks that had cast her out had torn flesh and spirit alike, leaving her with internal wounds that whispered a truth she already knew. The wounds inside were not mending. They festered, slowly consuming her from within. Yet she carried on, swaying with each agonizing step, because 2 small lives pressed against her heart had not asked for such a harsh world. She whispered broken prayers to the twins, her voice a thread unraveling in the hot wind. "Hush now, little doves. If I fall, someone will hear you." Someone must. Each word felt heavier than her bones, yet she let them fall into the open air. It was as if the prairie itself might cradle her daughters if she collapsed, offering a solace she could not. The cicadas hushed, their mournful song abruptly cut short, when a shadow appeared along the trail ahead. A tall figure rode slow on a weary horse, dust clinging to his boots and coat. This was Silas, a man who had been riding home from trading supplies in town. His thoughts were sunk deep into the familiar loneliness that followed him like a second shadow. He was a man of 34, weather-creased and broad-shouldered, but silence had become his only companion. He often thought that no soul in the West would remember his name if he slipped into the earth. Yet as his horse slowed, Silas saw the staggering figure of Eliza, her hair loose and tangled, her arms filled with squirming bundles. A jolt, the sort that cracks a man's stillness in 2, shot through him. At first, he thought he was seeing a ghost wandering in the twilight, some desert spirit condemned to haunt the dying light. But when she stumbled forward and dropped to her knees, the weak cry of a newborn split the silence. It was a sound too frail, too desperate to be ignored by any living soul. He swung down from his saddle, boots sinking into the dust as he approached, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and concern. The woman lifted her head, her eyes dull yet burning with the final glow of determination, a last flicker of strength. Her voice trembled like wind over glass, barely audible above the rustling of the dry grass. "Sir, it's my last day alive. The wounds, they are fatal." She looked down at the swaddled shapes, her breath ragged, each inhale a struggle. "Please, take them. Take my newborn twins." For a long breath, Silas stood frozen. Words had never come easy to him, and now they fled entirely, leaving him speechless in the face of such raw desperation. He saw the torn cloth, the tiny fists clutching at the air, the bruises smeared across her pale skin, telling a story of unimaginable suffering. He saw, too, the strange fire in her plea, not for herself, but for them, for her innocent children. The weight of her surrender pressed against him like a physical hand on his chest, heavy and undeniable. One of the babies whimpered, a soft mewling sound that cut through the twilight haze, a fragile cry for life. Silas felt something deep in his ribs stir, not pity, not duty, but the old ache of a man who had long forgotten what it meant to be needed, to have a purpose beyond his own solitary existence. His throat tightened, a lump forming as he struggled to find his voice. He crouched beside her, lowering himself into the dust so his eyes met hers, conveying a silent promise. "You're still breathing," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse, a sound that rarely escaped him. "Don't hand them over to death just yet." Her head bowed, strands of tangled hair falling across her bruised cheek, a visible sign of her exhaustion. "I've no strength left. Don't let them be taken by those who cast me out. Promise me that, stranger. Promise." Silas looked at her, then at the small bundles writhing faintly in her arms. The world around them seemed to hush, even the cicadas stilled, as if waiting on his answer, on his decision that would change everything. He had spent years believing he walked this earth alone, a solitary figure against the vastness of the prairie. But here, in the dying glow of day, a broken woman offered him the weight of her final hope, a profound trust in a stranger. He hesitated only a moment longer before sliding his arms beneath her frail frame, making a choice that would redefine his life. She let out a sound, half sob, half sigh, as he lifted her with a gentleness that surprised even him, a tenderness he hadn't known he possessed. The twins shifted, one letting out a soft cry that echoed like a fragile bell across the open land. Silas turned back toward his horse, his jaw tight, his mind already circling questions he could not yet ask. Who had done this to her? How deep were her wounds? Could she even last the night? Yet none of those questions mattered more than the undeniable fact that he could not leave her there, abandoned in the dust like an unwanted ghost, a specter of the cruelty she had endured. As the sun dipped low, casting their shadows long and thin against the prairie, Silas laid her across his saddle with the twins cradled against her chest. Her eyelids fluttered, her breath shallow but steady enough to cling to life a little longer, a testament to her resilient spirit. He mounted behind her, steadying her fragile form with one arm, his strength supporting her weakness, and tugged the reins. The horse turned toward the darkening trail that led to his lonely ranch house. For the first time in years, Silas felt the shape of a vow forming inside him, silent but binding, a commitment that neither the woman nor the twins would be left to the cruelty of the world again. And as the night pressed close around them, Eliza's whisper carried against his chest, so faint he almost thought he imagined it. "You came, just in time." Silas did not answer. His silence held more weight than words could bear, but his tightened grip around her spoke the truth he was not yet ready to say. The trail ahead disappeared into shadows, and though neither knew what waited, the first step into a future none of them had imagined had already been taken. The cabin stood lonely against the horizon, its timbers worn by years of wind and sun, a place that had long mirrored the man who lived within. Silas pushed open the door with his shoulder, the weight of Eliza and her children heavy in his arms, though not as heavy as the thought that she might not survive the night. The smell of dry wood and leather greeted him, faintly mixed with the scent of last week's bread. It was not a warm home by any measure, but it was shelter, a refuge from the unforgiving prairie, and now it carried the fragile breaths of three who had nowhere else to go. He laid her carefully upon his bed, the quilts faded but clean, and adjusted the swaddled twins so that they nestled against her chest, drawing comfort from her proximity. Her eyes fluttered, lids heavy as if the world was asking too much of her, her body fighting to hold on. He lit the oil lamp on the table, its glow spilling across her bruised face, and for the first time, he could see the full story etched into her skin. Purple shadows curved under her eyes, her lip was split, and faint welts lined her arms. She was more ghost than woman, a mere shadow of her former self, yet she clung to the tiny bodies with a fierce determination that told him she was not ready to surrender, not yet. Silas moved with quiet urgency, fetching water from the bucket and wetting a cloth to lay against her brow, a small act of comfort. He heated broth left over from his own supper and lifted a spoon to her lips. She swallowed weakly, then shook her head, murmuring that the children needed it more, her maternal instinct overriding her own pain. He ignored her protest, gently but firmly feeding her until her hand rose weakly to push him away, a sign of her exhaustion. Only then did he tend to the twins, dipping a rag into goat's milk and pressing it gently against their lips. They drank greedily, and he felt something shift in his chest, as though a lock had turned, and a door, long sealed within him, cracked open, revealing a hidden chamber of tenderness. Through the night, he kept watch, rocking one child when she cried, pacing slow across the floor with the other pressed against his shoulder, a new rhythm to his solitary life. The hours bled into one another, the oil lamp burning low, his eyes never straying far from the bed where Eliza lay breathing shallowly, her life hanging by a thread. At times he thought she had slipped beyond reach, but then her chest rose again, faint yet steady, a tiny victory in the battle for survival. By morning, the sound of a wagon creaked near. He stepped outside, finding Martha, his nearest neighbor, climbing down with a basket in hand. She was a wiry widow with silver hair, known for her blunt words and her habit of watching over the valley like a hawk, missing nothing. She eyed him, then the figure through the cabin door, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "You've taken in trouble, Silas," she said, her voice low but not unkind, stating the obvious. "Maybe so," he answered, his tone even, his gaze steady. "But she's here now." Martha sighed, lifting the basket. "I brought milk and bread. Those babes won't last without more than you can give." She placed the basket in his hands, her gaze softening, a rare display of empathy. "Men will talk, you know. They'll say you keep another man's widow under your roof. But I've seen enough years to know talk is wind. Do right by her, Silas. That's the only thing that lasts." He gave a short nod, grateful though he could not say the words aloud, his silent acknowledgement speaking volumes. When she left, he stood for a long time watching the dust rise behind her wagon, knowing her warning was true. The town's tongue could be crueler than any whip, and sooner or later it would lash out. Inside, Eliza stirred. She opened her eyes and found him watching from the chair near the door, his presence a constant, comforting shadow. Her lips parted, her voice little more than a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any accusation, searching for an answer she couldn't comprehend. Silas had no answer ready. He looked down at his rough hands, the lines of labor etched deep into them, telling a story of a life lived by honest work. He thought of the years spent in silence, tending his ranch alone, burying his heart beneath work, keeping his emotions locked away. At last he said, "Because you asked me to." She studied him for a long time, as though searching for falsehood in his face, for any hint of deceit, then closed her eyes again, contemplating his simple honesty. The twins stirred restlessly, and Silas rose to quiet them. His movements were awkward at first, but patience grew in his hands, a newfound tenderness guiding his actions. He fed them, rocked them, and set them down again, each act watched in silence by Eliza, who seemed unable to believe a man could care without demand, without expecting anything in return. Days stretched into one another, each one bringing a slow but steady recovery. Her wounds healed slowly, though she remained fragile, every motion costing more strength than she had to give. Still, she began to rise from the bed, to move around the cabin with careful steps, testing her returning strength. She swept the floor one morning, her hands trembling on the broom, then sat back down, her breath ragged but her eyes shining with a quiet pride, a sense of accomplishment. Silas said nothing, only fetched water for her when she was finished, his silent support a steady presence. At night, he would hear her singing to the twins, a soft lullaby, cracked by exhaustion, a melody of both sorrow and hope. Her voice carried a sorrow too deep for words, yet it filled the cabin with a tenderness he had not known in years, a gentle warmth that seeped into his solitary existence. He would lie awake on the cot he had dragged to the far corner, listening, the sound burrowing into his chest, awakening long dormant emotions. Yet the air outside their small refuge was heavy with judgment. When Silas rode to town for supplies, he felt the stares on his back, heard the mutters, the whispers of disapproval. Men at the saloon laughed that he had taken in a useless woman who bore nothing but daughters, scornful of her perceived worth. Others sneered that she would drain him dry and leave him with nothing, predicting his downfall. Silas did not answer. He let silence serve as his shield, a stoic defense against their cruel words. But inside, a slow heat built, a defiance that surprised him. He returned each time with supplies, and said nothing of the whispers, protecting Eliza from the harsh realities of the outside world. Eliza, sensing more than he told, kept her eyes down when he unpacked the goods, her own intuition picking up on the unspoken tension. The twins cooed and reached for him now, their tiny fingers curling around his calloused ones, forming an undeniable bond. He found himself smiling in ways he had forgotten he could, a genuine happiness blooming in his heart. One evening, as the sun bled red across the plains, Eliza spoke again. She sat near the hearth, the twins asleep in their cradles Silas had carved from spare wood, a testament to his quiet care. Her face glowed faintly in the firelight, her voice hesitant, seeking answers. "A man doesn't carry a burden like me and my babes without reason. Tell me why, Silas." He stared into the flames, the crackle filling the silence, searching for the right words. Words pressed against his chest, but refused to climb free, held back by years of unspoken emotion. At last he said only, "Because someone should." Her eyes shimmered, but she did not press further, accepting his simple, profound answer. She turned her gaze to the twins, her lips forming a faint smile, though shadows lingered in her expression, remnants of her past pain. Silas watched her in silence, his heart tight with things he had never dared to speak, feelings he was just beginning to understand. The night deepened, the fire's glow soft against the wooden walls, and in that quiet, the question she had asked lingered still between them, unanswered yet unforgotten, a thread pulling them toward a truth neither was ready to claim. The days unfolded like worn pages, each carrying the mark of survival, each binding Silas and Eliza more tightly together, though neither spoke it aloud. The cabin that had once held only Silas's silence now echoed with soft cries, the hum of a lullaby, the creak of floorboards beneath weary steps, a vibrant symphony of life. Still, outside those walls, the world sharpened its tongue. Word had reached the town like smoke drifting from a dying fire, spreading gossip and judgment. They whispered of Silas sheltering a cast-aside widow, of babes too frail to live, of impropriety hidden beneath the thin excuse of mercy. Some called it pity, others disgrace, but all agreed it was strange that a man who had shunned company for years now carried burdens that weren't his own. Silas heard the talk in snatches when he rode in for supplies, each careless word flung like grit into his eyes, stinging with injustice. He never answered, though his hands tightened on the reins and his jaw set like stone, his quiet defiance growing. Back at the cabin, Eliza felt the weight of those whispers, though she did not hear them. She saw it in the quiet way Silas unpacked his saddlebags, in the lines drawn harder across his brow, in the subtle shifts of his demeanor. She asked nothing, yet her silence carried its own ache, her empathy for his burden. Her body was healing, though slowly, and with every day she gathered enough strength to do more than survive. She mended Silas's shirts with uneven stitches, swept the floor when her ribs allowed, tended the small patch of soil outside where wild herbs dared to grow. Each small task gave her a sense of belonging, a fragile thread of purpose, though she feared it was an illusion that could vanish with a single harsh word from him. One evening, as twilight spilled gold across the horizon, Silas returned from the shed carrying 2 rough wooden cradles he had fashioned from scrap lumber. He set them down beside her without ceremony, a simple but profound gesture. The twins slept curled together in a single blanket, and when Eliza lifted them into the cradles, her hands trembled, overwhelmed by the kindness. Her eyes filled, not with words, but with something older than gratitude, a deep well of emotion. A disbelief that anyone, let alone this quiet man, would carve safety into wood for daughters the world had already deemed worthless. That night she sang to them in a voice steadier than before, the melody weaving through the cabin like a fragile ribbon, a song of hope. Silas sat in his chair, boots planted firm on the floor, and listened as though each note carried a truth he could not name, a resonance that touched his soul. The next day, Martha came again with milk and a sack of flour. She lingered longer this time, fussing over the babies, her gaze filled with a gentle affection, then turned her sharp eyes on Silas. "You're marked now," she said plainly, a statement of fact. "The town's got its story, and it won't soften easy." Silas only shrugged, though his silence was heavier than usual, acknowledging the truth of her words. Martha laid a hand on Eliza's arm and whispered, "Hold steady, child. A woman's worth isn't written by men's tongues." When she left, the room felt smaller, as though her words had pressed walls closer around them, emphasizing their isolation. Eliza began to sense a shift in Silas, a quiet defiance building beneath his stillness, a growing strength within him. He worked harder, rode further, yet returned each evening with his silence wrapped tighter, a shield against the judgments of others. One night, as she rocked the twins, she dared ask, "Do they scorn you because of me?" He looked at her then, his eyes shadowed in lamplight, and after a long pause he said, "They scorn what they don't understand. That's always been enough reason for some." Then he turned back to his chair, as though the matter was closed, but the words lingered, like an ember refusing to die, a quiet testament to his convictions. Trouble arrived sooner than either had wished. A rider appeared at dusk, his figure cutting sharp against the fading sky, a harbinger of conflict. Silas stepped outside before he even dismounted, Eliza clutching the twins close as she watched through the window, her heart pounding with dread. The man was rough-hewn, his eyes bright with arrogance, a familiar face of cruelty. He claimed kinship to her late husband, spitting Silas's name like a curse, a challenge thrown into the twilight. "You've no right to her or those brats," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Blood says they belong with us. Daughters or not, they're ours to do with as we please." Eliza's heart seized, her body still tender from wounds not yet healed. She could barely breathe as the words echoed inside her, a chilling reminder of her past torment. Silas stood rooted, his frame tall and immovable, a silent sentinel. His reply came low, each word hammered with steel, firm and unyielding. "They belong where they're safe. That isn't with you." The man's laughter rang harsh across the yard, but Silas didn't waver. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't shout. He simply stood, radiating a kind of silence that spoke louder than rage, a powerful, unspoken threat. The rider's smirk faltered beneath it, though his parting words dripped venom. "This isn't over. You'll regret keeping what isn't yours." He spurred his horse and vanished into the twilight, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease. Inside, Eliza trembled, her body racked with fear. Silas entered quietly, his eyes catching hers, conveying a silent understanding. She wanted to thank him, to tell him what his stand had meant, but her throat closed tight, choked by emotion. Instead, she clutched the twins closer, her tears falling onto their blankets, a silent release of her terror and relief. Silas set his hand briefly on the doorframe, his posture weighted with unspoken promises, a silent pledge of protection. The night that followed was restless. Eliza lay awake, listening to the storm of thoughts thrumming in her chest. She replayed his voice, steady as iron, and wondered how a man who owed her nothing could stand against blood and threat for her sake. The cabin walls no longer felt like mere walls, but like the arms of a fortress, held steady by one man's resolve. Silas kept watch near the door, his rifle leaning against the wall, though his hands never touched it, his vigilance a silent comfort. His gaze flicked often to the cradles, then to Eliza as she shifted restlessly, his concern palpable. He did not speak, but in his silence she found an answer her heart both feared and longed for, a growing certainty. When dawn broke, pale light spilling across the floor, Eliza whispered into the hush, though she thought he might not hear, "If I survive, where will I belong?" Silas stirred but didn't turn, his silence filling the space where words might have gone, yet the weight of it was heavy, heavier than any promise she could imagine. And in that quiet, the question hung between them, trembling with the power to reshape both their lives, unanswered but alive, pulling them toward a truth neither could yet bring themselves to name. Friends, if you're finding strength in Silas's quiet resolve, hit that like button and subscribe to True Wild West for more stories of courage and heart. The days after the rider's visit carried a brittle quiet, as though the land itself held its breath, awaiting the inevitable return of trouble. Silas moved through the hours with deliberate steadiness, his hands busy with chores, his eyes always scanning the horizon, ever vigilant. Eliza felt the tension in his silence, saw it in the way he lingered at the doorway before dusk, the way his shoulders tightened when the wind carried the sound of hooves too far away to see. She tended the twins as best she could, her body healing yet still fragile, but every cry of the babies drew her closer to the truth that danger would return. The town's whispers grew sharper, fueled by the cousins' malicious gossip. Martha came by with more milk and bread, her words clipped, her expression grim. The cousin spreads his poison in the saloon. Says you've stolen, what's his? Says he'll ride again, not alone this time. She glanced at Eliza, her eyes softening with a genuine concern. Be ready, child. This land's never been kind to a woman's courage, but sometimes it bends for a man's silence. She left without further warning, the rattle of her wagon fading into the dry evening air, leaving behind a profound sense of foreboding. Eliza sat near the cradle, brushing her fingers across the foreheads of her daughters, finding comfort in their innocent presence. Fear pressed against her ribs, yet beneath it pulsed something new, a fragile thread of trust, a growing belief in Silas. She looked toward Amos, who stood at the window watching the dying light. His profile was stern, his jaw set like granite, yet she had seen the gentleness in his hands when he rocked the twins. She wondered how long a man could carry both steel and tenderness without breaking, how long he could sustain such a delicate balance. That night the air thickened, heavy with the scent of dust and sweat, a storm without clouds, an unspoken tension hanging in the atmosphere. The pounding of hooves shattered the stillness, a violent intrusion. Silas stepped outside before the riders fully appeared, the lantern's glow casting his shadow long across the yard, a lone figure facing an encroaching darkness. Eliza's heart seized as she peeked through the cracks of the wall. 4 men rode in, led by the same cousin whose sneer she had etched into her memory, his face contorted with malice, his voice cut sharp across the dark. "You had your chance to hand them over," he called, his tone mocking. "Now we'll take what belongs to us." Silas stood unarmed, his rifle left inside, a testament to his desire for a peaceful resolution. His voice carried low but steady, unwavering in the face of their aggression. They belonged to no man's cruelty. "You'll not touch them," the cousin laughed, dismounting with a swagger that reeked of false confidence, eager for a confrontation. The others followed, circling like wolves, predatory and menacing. "You think you can stand against us alone? She's as good as dead already, and those babes will drain you dry. Best hand them over before you regret it." Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out, her fear almost overwhelming her. The twins stirred in their cradle, sensing the storm outside, their innocent sleep disturbed. She wanted to run, to shield them with her body, yet her limbs trembled too fiercely to move. Her eyes fixed on Silas, who stood unmoving, the lantern's glow catching the hard planes of his face, a mask of grim determination. The cousin lunged, shoving him hard in the chest, initiating the attack. Silas staggered but did not strike back, his restraint a calculated strategy. His silence deepened, every inch of him radiating a warning, a powerful message of impending consequence. The second shove came harsher, and still he did not retaliate, patiently waiting for the opportune moment. Only when one man reached for the cabin door did Silas's hand shoot out, gripping his arm with a force that made the intruder yelp in pain. Silas's voice rumbled, slow and cold, a deep and resonant threat. "You cross that threshold, you answer to me." The men hesitated, their laughter faltering, surprised by his sudden power. The cousin snarled, drawing a knife, but before he could step forward, Silas struck. His fist landed clean across the man's jaw, sending him sprawling into the dirt, a swift and decisive blow. The others rushed in, and the yard erupted into a tangle of fists and curses, a chaotic struggle. Silas fought not with fury, but with necessity, every movement precise, each blow meant to drive them back, not to kill, his focus on protection. Dust rose around them, the lantern swinging wildly as shadows leapt across the walls, distorting the scene. Inside, Eliza clutched the twins, her body frozen between terror and awe, witnessing a transformation. She had seen men fight before, but never like this, not with such restraint, not with such purpose. Silas moved like a man who had something to lose. Though he had never claimed her nor the children as his own, his actions speaking louder than any declaration. Each strike, each stand of his broad frame spoke a vow louder than words, a silent promise of unwavering defense. One by one, the intruders fell back, groaning, their bravado stripped away, their confidence shattered. The cousin spat blood into the dirt, glaring with eyes that burned but wavered under Silas's steady gaze, a flicker of fear in his hostile expression. "This ain't finished," he hissed, his voice filled with impotent rage. "You'll regret the day you crossed us." He mounted his horse with shaking hands, the others following, and within moments their hooves faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence broken only by heavy breathing. Silas stood breathing hard, blood dripping from a split knuckle, dust streaking his shirt, a warrior after a battle. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and turned slowly toward the cabin. Eliza met him at the door, her daughters cradled close, her face a mixture of relief and unspoken emotion. Her lips parted but no words came, choked by the intensity of the moment. Instead, tears spilled silently down her cheeks, a quiet release of all she had endured. Silas's gaze softened as it fell on the twins, a profound tenderness replacing the hardness of battle. For the first time, he reached out and brushed his calloused fingers against the tiny hand of one sleeping child. The baby's fingers curled instinctively around his, holding fast, forming an instant connection. He swallowed hard, his throat working as though words pressed there but refused to be spoken, his emotions too raw for utterance. Eliza whispered, her voice shaking, "Why would you do this for us?" He looked at her, his silence deep and unbroken, but the weight in his eyes told her more than any oath, a profound declaration of commitment. She felt it, raw and undeniable, the truth that this man who owed her nothing had risked all he had for her and her daughters, his selflessness a revelation. The cabin seemed smaller now, filled with the lingering echo of hooves and the heavy beat of their hearts, a sanctuary against the world's cruelty. Eliza lowered her gaze, unable to bear the storm of feelings rising within her. She pressed her cheek against one daughter's head, whispering a prayer she had not dared to speak in weeks, a prayer of gratitude and hope. Behind her, Silas moved to the window again, his shoulders broad and unyielding in the lamplight, a silent guardian. His silence stretched into the night, But for the first time, Eliza did not fear it. She knew it carried more than words ever could, a promise, fragile yet firm, that they would not face the world's cruelty alone. And as the fire burned low, she felt a question stirring inside her chest, a question she feared to voice but knew would not be silenced. If such a man could stand for them, could she dare to believe in something more than survival? Could she dare to hope for a future she had thought impossible? If this gripping tale resonates with you, give us a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates true grit and kindness. The dawn broke pale and tender, spilling light across the cabin floorboards like a blessing, a new beginning. Eliza sat near the cradle, her daughters sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, their small chests rising and falling in rhythm with the quiet around them, a picture of serenity. Her body still bore the ache of old wounds, but her spirit trembled with something new, a stirring she could not yet name, a burgeoning hope. Behind her, Silas lingered at the table, his hands resting heavily on the wood, his eyes fixed on her as if he carried a weight too long unsaid, a confession waiting to be released. He cleared his throat, a sound rougher than the wind outside, breaking the profound silence. "Eliza," he began, his voice unsteady, vulnerable. "I thought I was saving you. Truth is, you saved me." She turned, startled, as though the earth itself had shifted beneath her, utterly surprised by his words. His gaze was steady, though his words faltered in their climb, raw and heartfelt. "I don't want to just guard these girls. I want to be the one they call father. And I want you too." Her breath caught, disbelief flooding her eyes, her mind struggling to process his profound declaration. She shook her head, the movement sharp, almost pained, her past wounds making her doubt. "No man chooses a woman broken like me," she whispered, her voice laced with self-doubt. "I'm nothing but scars and shame, cast out by my own blood." Silas rose, the floor creaking under his boots, a determined resolve in his movements. He crossed the room and knelt before her, lowering his tall frame until his eyes met hers, an act of humility and earnestness. Gently, he took her hand, calloused fingers warm around her trembling ones, offering comfort and reassurance. Then he placed her palm over the cradle where the twins slept safely between them, a silent symbol of their shared future. "Then let them tell you if I lie," he said softly, his voice full of conviction. "Every breath they take says I was meant to be here, with them, with you." Tears filled her eyes, spilling hot down her bruised cheeks, a release of pent-up emotion. She wanted to believe, yet fear clung stubbornly to her heart, a remnant of her past trauma. But when Silas's hand tightened over hers, steady as stone, something inside her broke open. The years of rejection, the weight of cruelty, the lies of worthlessness, they cracked, and in the cracks light poured through, illuminating a path to a new beginning. The hours that followed passed in a hush, filled with a quiet understanding. Martha came that afternoon, carrying her Bible and her weathered wisdom, a trusted witness. Under the quiet glow of the hearth, Silas and Eliza spoke vows that trembled with humility, not grandeur, promises whispered from the heart. No crowd bore witness, only the twins cooing softly, and Martha's steady voice, a simple, heartfelt ceremony. Yet the simplicity of it bound them more tightly than any grand ceremony could, a sacred union forged in adversity. When it was done, Silas lifted her hand and pressed his lips against it, reverent as a prayer, a gesture of profound love and respect. Eliza looked at him through her tears, still half doubting, still half dreaming, but unable to deny the warmth flooding her chest, a feeling of belonging she had never known. She leaned against him, her daughters safe between them, and for the first time since her life had been torn apart, she let herself rest, finding peace in his embrace. And so the cabin, once silent as a grave, became a home reborn, fragile, tender, yet stronger than stone, a testament to resilience and love. Out beyond the door, the prairie stretched endless, holding more trials, more whispers, more battles yet to come. But within those walls a promise had been spoken, and the story of a woman thought broken and a man thought alone had only just begun. Here on True Wild West, we believe in the power of hope and the strength of the human spirit. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell us what part touched you most. And so, friend, from the dust and silence of the West, a broken woman, a lonely man, and 2 newborn girls found a home where none believed it could be. If this tale touched your heart, let me know where in this wide world you are listening from. Are you beneath desert skies by rolling fields or in a city that never sleeps? Share your place with us in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and walk with us again, for there are more stories waiting, as many as stars above the prairie night. Thank you for joining us on True Wild West. We'll see you next time with another unforgettable tale.